Daniel had always loved the quiet mornings at his property by the water. The sun would rise slowly, casting golden streaks across the lake, and the soft sound of water lapping against the shore was the only thing breaking the calm. For years, he had thought of this place as a personal haven, a space where the stress of the world outside could not touch him. But over the past few months, that peace had been slowly chipped away by letters and emails from the Homeowners Association. The first letter had arrived on a crisp Monday morning. The envelope was thick and formal, stamped with the HOA's seal. Daniel remembered opening it with a calm curiosity, expecting something minor. Instead, he found a long list of violations. The letter claimed his dock extended too far into the water, that his landscaping did not comply with neighborhood rules, and even that he had planted flowers that were unapproved. Daniel could not help but chuckle at the audacity. He had lived here for over 20 years and had never had any trouble. How could a group of people he barely knew think they could dictate what he did on his own land? At first, Daniel ignored the letters, hoping the HOA would get bored or realize their errors. But the next week brought another letter, more aggressive this time, threatening fines if he did not comply immediately. Then came the phone calls, the emails, and even a visit from a board member who tried to assert authority in person. Daniel's patience began to wear thin, though he still maintained a calm exterior. He knew that reacting emotionally would only give them more satisfaction. One evening, after another frustrating phone call, Daniel decided to take action. He sat at his desk with old legal documents, property maps, and deeds he had inherited from his grandfather. Daniel had always been proud of his family's history, but until now he had not realized just how deep it went. As he sifted through the papers, his eyes widened at what he found. Hidden among the old records were documents that suggested something extraordinary. His family legally owned not just their property, but the waterways running through the entire county. The realization was staggering. The very thing the HOA had been threatening to control was under his ownership. The dock complaints, the landscaping restrictions, the fines, they were meaningless against the law. Daniel leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of this truth sink in. For the first time in months, a sense of relief and excitement coursed through him. He was not just a resident. He was the owner of a vast and powerful natural resource. The following days were filled with careful research. Daniel visited the county courthouse, poring over centuries-old land grants, historical water rights documents, and maps that had been forgotten over time. He cross-referenced every detail, confirming that the ownership records were legitimate and legally binding. The more he discovered, the more he realized how much power he truly had. It was a responsibility as much as a privilege, and Daniel felt both pride and a sense of duty. Even as he researched, the HOA's harassment continued. They sent more letters, each one more threatening than the last. They called meetings, hoping to corner him publicly and assert their authority. Daniel attended one such meeting, sitting quietly while the board members spoke. Their smugness, their overconfidence was palpable. They assumed that everyone, even someone like Daniel, would follow their rules without question. But Daniel had changed. He no longer saw them as authority figures. He saw them as people who had overstepped, unaware of the legal truth. In the evenings, Daniel would walk along the shore, letting the cool water wash over his thoughts. The gentle lapping of the waves was a reminder of what he truly owned, of the history and value that extended far beyond the neighborhood rules. He imagined the possibilities: access to the waterways for himself and those he trusted, the ability to regulate use responsibly, and even the chance to protect the environment from those who might exploit it. But he also understood that with this power came the need for careful action. Impulsive decisions could lead to legal complications or unnecessary conflict. Despite the growing excitement, Daniel remained strategic. He began documenting everything meticulously. He scanned old maps, copied legal documents, and created a detailed timeline of ownership. Every interaction with the HOA was recorded, every letter saved, every email archived. Daniel knew that knowledge and preparation were his strongest allies. If the HOA tried to challenge him, he would have proof on his side. It was not about vengeance. It was about setting boundaries and asserting rights. Neighbors began to notice Daniel's renewed presence and confidence. Some were curious, others cautious. Rumors started to spread that he might be more than just a property owner, that there was something unique about his claim. Daniel kept interactions polite but distant, knowing that too much sharing could complicate matters. He preferred action over gossip and had learned that patience was key. One evening, while reviewing yet another stack of historical documents, Daniel discovered an old newspaper clipping tucked between the pages of a county record book. It described disputes over water rights from decades ago, mentioning his family by name and detailing conflicts that had been resolved in favor of his ancestors. Daniel smiled at the continuity, at the thought that his family had stood strong in the face of challenges long before him. History had a way of repeating itself, and now it was his turn. The tension escalated when the HOA sent a particularly aggressive letter demanding that Daniel remove his dock immediately or face substantial fines. Most residents would have panicked, but Daniel saw an opportunity. He read the letter carefully, noting the legal language and the threats. Then he compared it to the documentation he had gathered over weeks. Every claim the HOA made was baseless. The dock, the landscaping, the access to the water, they were all within his legal rights. He realized that this confrontation was inevitable, but he was ready. Daniel spent that night drafting a response. He wrote carefully, citing legal documents, historical records, and water rights statutes. The tone was firm but not aggressive, factual rather than emotional. He wanted the HOA to understand the reality without escalating the situation unnecessarily. When he sent the letter, he felt a mix of satisfaction and anticipation. The days ahead would test patience, strategy, and courage. As he returned to the shoreline the next morning, the sun reflecting on the water, Daniel felt a sense of clarity. The fight was not just about a dock or a flower bed. It was about standing up to unwarranted authority, understanding one's rights, and protecting something valuable that had been in his family for generations. The water flowed peacefully, ignorant of human disputes, but Daniel knew its significance. He was no longer just a man with property. He was a steward of a vital part of the county. Throughout the week, Daniel continued to receive communications from the HOA. Each letter, each call, served as a reminder of their overconfidence and lack of knowledge, but Daniel remained unshaken. He had done the work, verified the facts, and prepared for any challenges. The letters that once caused frustration now brought a quiet satisfaction. Every attempt they made to intimidate him only underscored their lack of understanding and his preparedness. Neighbors who interacted with him began to notice a subtle shift. Daniel carried himself with a calm confidence, speaking with authority but never arrogance. People would ask him casually about his work or his property, and he would answer with a polite smile, never revealing too much. Word slowly spread that he was not someone to be trifled with, that he knew his rights and was ready to defend them. At the end of the week, Daniel sat on his dock as the sun dipped below the horizon. The water shimmered in the fading light, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves. He thought about the journey ahead, knowing that confronting the HOA would be challenging. But he also felt a sense of empowerment. For the first time, the frustration and anxiety of the past months were replaced by purpose and clarity. The struggle was no longer about petty rules. It was about respect, history, and the rightful control of something profoundly important. Daniel stood, brushing the grass from his pants, and looked out over the water. The vastness of it, the legacy contained in every ripple, reminded him why he had fought so hard to understand it. The HOA might continue to push, to send letters, to assert imagined authority, but Daniel now knew the truth. He owned the water, and with that ownership came both responsibility and power. The calm that had been absent from his life for months began to return, not as resignation but as readiness. He was prepared for what was to come, and the waters he loved so much would finally reflect the respect and control that he rightfully commanded. Daniel could hardly sleep that night, though the gentle sounds of the water normally soothed him. His mind kept turning over the discovery he had made about his legal rights to the county waterways. It was one thing to read old documents and legal language, but it was another to truly understand the weight of what it meant. He felt a mix of excitement, disbelief, and responsibility. He now realized he held something far greater than a private dock or a peaceful lakeside view. He had control over an entire network of waterways. The next morning, Daniel decided to visit the county courthouse. He wanted to see the original deeds, maps, and water rights documents in person to confirm every detail. The courthouse was quiet, with high ceilings and the and smell of old paper. He made his way to the records room and began pulling volumes from the shelves. Page after page, the evidence confirmed what he had already found. His family's ownership stretched across the county, documented and recognized by law. As he studied the records, Daniel thought about the implications. The HOA had no authority over him, not on the land, not on the water. Every demand, every fine, every attempt to control him was baseless. The realization filled him with a quiet confidence. He could finally plan how to protect the waterways and assert his rights without fear. It was like holding a key to a hidden world, one that had always been under his family's name but forgotten by most. When he returned home, Daniel spent hours organizing his research. He created folders for each type of document: historical maps, property deeds, water rights laws, and correspondence with the HOA. He highlighted key passages and wrote notes in the margins. Every detail mattered. He was preparing not only to protect his property, but to educate himself on the full scope of his legal power. Despite his preparation, the HOA's harassment continued. Letters arrived almost daily, each one more insistent than the last. They demanded compliance fines and even threatened legal action. Daniel read each one carefully, comparing their claims to his documents. Every time he found inconsistencies, errors, and a lack of legal grounding. The HOA was operating on assumptions, not facts, and Daniel knew it. One afternoon, a board member showed up unannounced at Daniel's property. She was polite but firm, insisting that Daniel remove his dock immediately and comply with landscaping rules. Daniel welcomed her politely but maintained his composure. He showed her a copy of one of the deeds and explained, calmly, that the property included rights to the waterways. She looked surprised and unsure how to respond. Daniel didn't press further. He simply let the truth speak for itself. She left quietly, and for the first time he sensed a shift in her confidence. Daniel also began thinking strategically. He knew the HOA might try to fight back in court or stir up other residents against him. To prepare, he started researching legal precedents, past disputes over water rights, and local regulations that could affect his control. He made notes on potential counterarguments and considered how to respond to different scenarios. It was a careful, deliberate process, but Daniel understood the importance of patience and planning. In the evenings, Daniel walked along the shore, letting the rhythm of the water calm his thoughts. He imagined how the waterways could be used responsibly, for recreation, for nature, and for the community. He knew that ownership came with responsibility. It wasn't just about asserting power over the HOA. It was about ensuring that the waters remained protected and respected. This perspective gave him a sense of purpose beyond personal vindication. Daniel's research also led him to discover stories from his family history. There were accounts of his ancestors standing up against local authorities, of legal battles fought over land and water rights, and of efforts to maintain the natural beauty of the county. Reading these stories gave Daniel a sense of continuity. He was following in their footsteps, continuing a legacy of courage, knowledge, and respect for the land. The more he learned, the more connected he felt to the past and to the responsibilities of the present. Word of Daniel's situation began to spread quietly among neighbors. Some were curious, others skeptical. A few approached him with questions about the water rights, clearly unsure of the legal details. Daniel answered politely but cautiously, not revealing too much. He wanted to protect the information until he was ready to take formal action. Meanwhile, the HOA continued their attempts to assert control, unaware that Daniel was now fully prepared. One afternoon, Daniel received an email from a local historian who had heard about his research. The historian offered to meet and share old maps and records that were not widely available. Daniel welcomed the help. Over the next few days, they pored over documents in the historian's office, uncovering additional proof of his family's ownership and historical conflicts over the waterways. The more evidence Daniel gathered, the more confident he became that he could stand up to the HOA and defend his rights effectively. Daniel also started envisioning the future. He thought about ways to make the waterways accessible while protecting them from misuse. He considered creating designated areas for boating, fishing, and other activities. He wanted to ensure that the waters remained a valuable resource for generations to come. This long-term vision gave him a sense of responsibility and pride, reinforcing his commitment to act wisely. Even with all the preparation, Daniel knew that confrontation was inevitable. The HOA had shown no signs of backing down, and their arrogance made them underestimate him. He began rehearsing how he would present his case, practicing clarity and calmness. He knew that emotions could undermine the facts, so he focused on precision and professionalism. He also anticipated the possible reactions of board members, preparing responses that were firm but respectful. As the days passed, Daniel began to feel a quiet sense of empowerment. The water that once symbolized simple peace now represented authority, history, and responsibility. He understood that his challenge with the HOA was not just about a dock or flowers. It was about standing up for rights, protecting a legacy, and maintaining control over something far larger than himself. Every letter, every visit from the HOA only strengthened his resolve. Neighbors started to notice the change in Daniel. He moved with a calm confidence that drew respect. People who once viewed him as a quiet property owner now sensed that he was someone who understood the law, history, and his place in the community. Daniel welcomed the subtle attention, knowing it could be useful when the time came to assert his rights publicly. Yet he remained careful, avoiding unnecessary conflicts or boasting about his discovery. By the end of the week, Daniel had compiled an impressive portfolio of documents, notes, and historical records. He felt prepared for any challenge the HOA could present. He had studied the law, researched history, and considered every potential scenario. Most importantly, he had clarified his own purpose: to protect the waterways, assert his legal rights, and ensure that the HOA could no longer impose unfair authority over him. Daniel returned to the water one evening, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The gentle ripples reflected the colors of the sky, and he felt a deep sense of connection to the land and water. This was not just property, it was a legacy, a responsibility, and a source of power. He knew that the battle ahead would require strategy, patience, and courage, but he also knew he was ready. As the stars began to appear, Daniel stood on the dock and looked out across the water. The journey was just beginning, but he felt prepared, confident, and determined. He understood that the HOA's authority was an illusion when measured against the law and history. For the first time, he felt fully in control, ready to face the challenges ahead and ensure that the waterways remained protected and respected. The calm of the evening water reminded him of what was truly at stake and why it was worth standing firm. Daniel was no longer just a man with property. He was the guardian of the county's waterways, and he would defend that responsibility with knowledge, patience, and quiet strength. The day of the HOA board meeting arrived, and Daniel felt a mix of calm and focus as he prepared to face the people who had been challenging him for months. He knew they expected to intimidate him, to corner him with their rules and authority. But Daniel also knew that they had no legal ground to stand on, and for the first time he felt truly ready to assert his rights. He carried with him folders of documents, maps, deeds, and notes, every detail organized for the confrontation ahead. The meeting took place in the neighborhood clubhouse, a room filled with polished wood and stiff chairs. Board members greeted each other with polite smiles, unaware that Daniel had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. He walked in quietly, nodding to a few neighbors who had come to observe, and took a seat near the front. The atmosphere was formal, almost tense, with an unspoken expectation that Daniel would comply with their rules. The HOA president began the meeting, outlining routine agenda items before turning to Daniel's property. The president's tone was firm, almost condescending. He spoke about violations, fines, and the importance of following community standards. Daniel listened patiently, his hands resting on the stack of documents in front of him. When the president finished, the room fell silent, waiting for Daniel's response. Daniel began speaking calmly, without anger or hesitation. He thanked the board for their concern, but explained that the documents he had brought demonstrated that the property and waterways were legally under his ownership. He presented the deeds, the historical records, and copies of water rights laws, pointing out specific passages that confirmed his authority. The room grew quiet as he spoke, the board members exchanging uneasy glances. One member attempted to interrupt, questioning the validity of the documents and insisting that the HOA had the right to enforce its rules. Daniel remained composed, addressing each point with evidence and clarity. He explained how the historical documents, combined with current legal statutes, gave him exclusive rights over the waterways, including control over docks and access. Points. The members' attempts to intimidate him began to falter under the weight of the facts. Daniel also took the opportunity to clarify the responsibilities he intended to uphold. He emphasized that his goal was not to disrupt the community, but to protect the waterways and ensure they were used responsibly. He outlined plans for maintaining access, preventing misuse, and preserving the natural environment. His tone was firm but fair, demonstrating both authority and respect. This approach seemed to catch the board members off guard, as they had expected confrontation and defiance, not a measured, factual explanation. As the discussion continued, it became clear that the HOA members had underestimated Daniel's preparation. They struggled to respond, often pausing mid-sentence, unsure of how to challenge the legal evidence he presented. Some members whispered to each other, consulting documents they had brought, while others simply watched, realizing that their authority was limited by the law. Daniel's calm confidence contrasted sharply with their uncertainty, and the dynamic in the room shifted. Throughout the meeting, neighbors observed quietly, some nodding in agreement, others looking surprised at the unfolding situation. Daniel's presentation was clear and thorough, leaving little room for argument. He had anticipated potential objections, and each was addressed systematically with evidence and reason. By the end of the discussion, the room had transformed from a place of expected intimidation to one of realization and respect. After the formal part of the meeting, the HOA president attempted a final appeal, asking Daniel to consider a compromise for the sake of community harmony. Daniel listened, then politely declined, explaining that the legal rights were non-negotiable, but that he was open to reasonable collaboration on shared concerns. The president, though visibly frustrated, had no legal basis to insist further. The meeting concluded with an uneasy acknowledgement from the board that they could not enforce their demands against him. As Daniel left the clubhouse, he felt a sense of triumph, but also responsibility. The confrontation had been successful, yet he knew the battle was not entirely over. The HOA might attempt indirect measures, stir up disputes, or challenge him in other ways. He had won the initial confrontation, but vigilance and careful planning would remain necessary. The victory was a beginning, not the end. Back at his property, Daniel walked along the shoreline, letting the water calm his thoughts. The sun reflected off the ripples, creating a sense of peace and continuity. He considered how his actions in the meeting had affected not only the board, but also the community. Some neighbors approached him, expressing curiosity and admiration for his approach. Daniel responded politely, careful not to boast, but quietly acknowledging the importance of standing up for one's rights. Over the following days, Daniel continued to strengthen his position. He met with legal advisors to confirm the robustness of his documents and to explore options for formalizing protections for the waterways. He also spoke with historians and local experts to ensure that his understanding of historical ownership was accurate. Every step reinforced his confidence and prepared him for any future challenges. The HOA, meanwhile, seemed uncertain. Some members considered legal action but quickly realized the strength of Daniel's position. Others tried to rally neighbors, but the evidence was clear, and most residents preferred to avoid unnecessary conflict. Daniel's careful documentation and respectful approach had turned the tables, showing that knowledge, preparation, and calm confidence could outweigh aggressive tactics. Daniel also began thinking about long-term stewardship. He wanted to ensure that the waterways remained protected and accessible in a responsible way. He considered creating guidelines for safe use, maintaining natural habitats, and providing educational resources for residents. This forward-thinking approach distinguished him from the HOA, which had focused primarily on control and compliance rather than preservation and care. One evening, Daniel met with a few trusted neighbors to discuss potential collaborative projects. He emphasized the importance of protecting the waterways while allowing for responsible enjoyment. They brainstormed ideas for community cleanups, safe boating areas, and educational programs for local schools. Daniel's approach was inclusive but firmly guided by his legal authority. The neighbors appreciated his transparency, and some even offered to help implement his ideas. As weeks passed, Daniel noticed a gradual shift in the neighborhood dynamic. The HOA's attempts at intimidation decreased, replaced by cautious respect. Daniel's reputation grew as someone knowledgeable, fair, and prepared to defend his rights. The once tense relationship with the board evolved into one of cautious acknowledgement. While disagreements could still arise, the power dynamic had fundamentally changed. Daniel's confidence continued to grow, reinforced by the knowledge that he had navigated a challenging confrontation successfully. The experience taught him the value of preparation, patience, and measured action. He understood that asserting one's rights required not just courage but also knowledge and strategy. The confrontation had tested his resolve, but it had also confirmed his ability to handle complex situations with calm authority. Even as life returned to a more peaceful rhythm, Daniel remained attentive. He monitored communications from the HOA, stayed informed about local regulations, and continued to maintain detailed records. The waterways were his responsibility, and he intended to uphold that responsibility with diligence. The confrontation had been a turning point, marking the beginning of a new chapter in his stewardship of the land and water. One evening, as he stood on the dock watching the sunset, Daniel reflected on the journey so far. The calm of the water, the glow of the sun, and the quiet rustle of the trees reminded him of what he was protecting. The HOA's challenges had tested him, but they had also clarified his purpose and strengthened his resolve. He felt a deep sense of connection to the land, the water, and the legacy of his family. Daniel knew that future challenges might arise, but he felt prepared. He had the knowledge, the documents, and the strategy to defend his rights. More importantly, he had the patience and calm confidence to navigate any situation without losing sight of the bigger picture. The confrontation with the HOA had been a defining moment, proving that careful preparation and respectful firmness could overcome arrogance and misinformation. As night fell and the stars reflected on the surface of the water, Daniel felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had faced the board, asserted his rights, and emerged stronger and more confident. The journey was far from over, but he knew he was ready for whatever came next. The waterways were under his protection, and he intended to ensure they remained safe, respected, and preserved for the future. The confrontation had been a success, but it was also a reminder of the responsibility that came with power, a responsibility Daniel was determined to honor. After the successful confrontation with the HOA, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The calm of the water reflected the clarity in his mind. He knew that asserting his rights was only the beginning. Now he had to take control, not in a way that was aggressive, but in a way that established clear boundaries and protected the waterways. The sense of responsibility weighed on him, but he welcomed it, understanding that stewardship required action, not just knowledge. Daniel began by reviewing the documents he had collected, ensuring every detail was accurate. He drafted a clear plan for managing access to the waterways, balancing his legal rights with the needs of the community. He wanted people to enjoy the lakes and streams responsibly, without harming the environment or infringing on his property. His plan included designated areas for boating, fishing, and walking, along with rules for maintaining cleanliness and respecting natural habitats. He also decided to communicate his intentions to the neighbors. A carefully worded letter explained his plans, emphasizing both the legal authority he held and his commitment to responsible stewardship. Daniel stressed that his goal was not to exclude anyone, but to ensure the waterways were safe and preserved. The letter was firm but respectful, and it included an invitation for neighbors to participate in discussions about the best way to manage the area. The response from the community was mixed. Some neighbors were supportive, appreciating Daniel's transparency and commitment to protecting the water. Others were skeptical, unsure of what this control meant for them personally. Daniel remained patient, meeting with residents individually when needed and answering questions with clarity and respect. He wanted to build understanding and cooperation, not resentment. Meanwhile, the HOA was still grappling with the reality of the situation. Their previous attempts to assert authority had failed, and now they faced a community that was becoming more informed and aligned with Daniel's perspective. Some board members considered legal action, but quickly realized that it would be costly and likely unsuccessful. Others began to see the value in cooperating rather than opposing. Daniel's calm confidence and thorough preparation had shifted the balance of power. Daniel also took practical steps to manage the waterways. He inspected the docks, cleared debris, and marked safe areas for swimming and boating. He consulted local environmental experts to ensure that his actions would protect wildlife and maintain the natural beauty of the area. Every decision was guided by both legal authority and a commitment to preserving the land and water for future generations. One morning, Daniel received a call from a neighbor who had concerns about a small group of people using the water irresponsibly. Daniel went to the site, observing quietly and documenting the situation. He approached the group calmly, explaining the rules and offering guidance on how to enjoy the water safely. The group responded positively, appreciating Daniel's respectful approach and clear knowledge of the waterways. It was a small victory, but it reinforced his belief that authority could be exercised responsibly and effectively. As weeks passed, Daniel's presence on the waterways became well known. He was seen walking along the shore, checking docks and talking with neighbors. His reputation grew as someone who was knowledgeable, fair, and firm. The HOA's influence continued to wane, replaced by the understanding that Daniel was the rightful authority. The power dynamic had shifted, not through confrontation alone, but through consistent, responsible action. Daniel also began planning for long-term stewardship. He considered creating educational programs for local schools, teaching children about the importance of water conservation and the history of the county waterways. He envisioned guided tours, community cleanups, and conservation projects. His goal was to foster a sense of shared responsibility while maintaining clear legal boundaries. By combining education, protection, and accessibility, Daniel hoped to create a sustainable model for managing the waterways. During this time, Daniel also strengthened his legal position. He reviewed historical records and water rights laws with his attorney, confirming that his control was secure and that any future challenges would be defensible. He maintained meticulous records of all actions taken, from correspondence with neighbors to observations of water use. This diligence ensured that Daniel could demonstrate responsibility and authority if questions arose. Neighborhood relations continued to improve. Daniel's respectful approach won over some initial skeptics, who began to appreciate the balance he maintained between authority and fairness. He held informal meetings with residents, listening to concerns and incorporating reasonable suggestions into his management plan. The result was a growing sense of community around the waterways, with Daniel as a knowledgeable and trusted guide. One afternoon, a local environmental group contacted Daniel, offering to collaborate on preservation efforts. He welcomed the partnership, seeing it as an opportunity to protect the natural habitats and enhance the quality of the waterways. Together, they planned cleanups, monitored wildlife, and educated visitors on responsible practices. Daniel's proactive approach reinforced his credibility and demonstrated that ownership and stewardship could coexist with community engagement. As Daniel walked along the shore one evening, he reflected on the journey so far. The confrontation with the HOA had been challenging, but it had clarified his purpose and strengthened his resolve. He had established authority without aggression, balancing legal rights with responsibility and respect. The water, once simply a place of personal peace, had become a symbol of his commitment and a resource he was determined to protect. Daniel also recognized the importance of patience. Change had not happened overnight, and relationships with neighbors required careful attention. He continued to monitor activity, provide guidance, and maintain communication. Every action reinforced the boundaries he had established and demonstrated his dedication to responsible management. In addition to practical management, Daniel began to think about legacy. The waterways had been in his family for generations, and he wanted to ensure that future owners and residents understood their significance and value. He documented the history, compiled stories and records, and created plans for ongoing stewardship. The project became a labor of care, blending legal authority with personal and historical responsibility. Through all of this, Daniel maintained a sense of calm and perspective. He knew that challenges could arise at any time, but he was prepared to address them with knowledge, patience, and fairness. The power of ownership was balanced by the responsibility to act wisely, and Daniel took that responsibility seriously. The waterways were not just a resource. They were a legacy, a connection to the past, and a trust for the future. As weeks turned into months, the dynamics in the neighborhood had transformed. The HOA's attempts at control had faded, replaced by recognition of Daniel's authority and careful stewardship. Neighbors increasingly sought his guidance and respected the rules he had set. Daniel had created a balance where the water could be enjoyed responsibly. The environment was protected and legal boundaries were clear. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Daniel stood on his dock looking across the shimmering water. The gentle waves reflected the light, and the air carried the quiet sounds of nature. He felt a deep satisfaction in the work he had done, the boundaries he had established, and the respect he had earned. The journey was ongoing, but Daniel had laid a foundation that would endure. The waterways were safe, respected, and preserved, and he had demonstrated that knowledge, preparation, and calm determination could create lasting impact. With the weeks passing, Daniel noticed the atmosphere in the neighborhood changing. The HOA had gradually stopped sending threatening letters and calling for meetings. It was clear they understood, finally, that they had no legal authority over the waterways. The tension that had once been so heavy in the community was lifting, replaced by a cautious respect. Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his persistence, preparation, and calm approach had won the day. The neighbors who had once been skeptical began to approach him with questions and ideas. They were curious about the history of the waterways, and Daniel was happy to share what he had learned. He spoke about his family's legacy, the centuries-old deeds, and the importance of preserving the natural environment. His tone was informative, never condescending, and he found that people listened more when he focused on education rather than confrontation. Slowly, a sense of trust grew between him and the community. Daniel also began organizing small events around the water. Guided walks, community cleanups, and educational gatherings became a regular part of life in the neighborhood. Residents appreciated the opportunity to learn and enjoy the waterways responsibly. The presence of these activities not only reinforced Daniel's authority, but also helped strengthen community bonds. People started to see the value in responsible stewardship and were happy to participate under his guidance. He continued to document everything meticulously. Every interaction, every action taken on the waterways, and every meeting with neighbors or experts was recorded. Daniel knew that maintaining thorough records was crucial, both for legal purposes and to set an example of transparency. He wanted it clear that his authority came not from arrogance or desire for control, but from preparation, knowledge, and responsibility. One afternoon, Daniel received a call from a local journalist. The journalist had heard about the situation and wanted to write a feature on the unique history and ownership of the county waterways. Daniel agreed, seeing an opportunity to educate a wider audience about the importance of water rights and environmental preservation. The interview was careful and thoughtful. Daniel emphasized history, stewardship, and community responsibility, rather than focusing on conflict with the HOA. When the article was published, it brought attention to the importance of understanding and respecting water rights, and Daniel received messages of support from people across the county. The HOA, meanwhile, had slowly shifted from confrontation to acceptance. A few board members approached Daniel privately, acknowledging that they had been mistaken and offering tentative cooperation on neighborhood matters that did not involve the waterways. Daniel listened politely, appreciating the gesture but remaining firm on the boundaries he had established. He recognized that maintaining authority required consistency and clarity. There could be no compromise on legal rights, but there was room for respectful dialogue and shared understanding on other neighborhood matters. Daniel also began mentoring a few neighbors who expressed interest in learning about property rights and environmental stewardship. He shared the historical context of water ownership, the legal foundations of his authority, and practical guidance on preserving natural areas. These conversations were fulfilling for Daniel, reinforcing his sense of purpose and allowing him to contribute positively to the community. It was a way to turn a contentious situation into an opportunity for education and growth. As time went on, Daniel noticed tangible improvements in the waterways. Trash and debris were reduced, wildlife began to thrive, and people used the area more responsibly. His proactive approach had not only established authority, but also created a more harmonious and sustainable environment. Daniel felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that his efforts had a lasting impact beyond his personal interests. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and painted the sky with warm shades, Daniel walked along the shore and reflected on the journey. The challenges with the HOA had been frustrating and stressful at times, but they had also pushed him to discover the depth of his family's legacy and the importance of responsible action. He thought about how much he had learned about law, history, and human nature, and how patience, preparation, and calm authority had allowed him to navigate a complex situation successfully. Daniel also considered the broader lessons for himself and the community. Standing up for what was right did not require aggression or anger. It required knowledge, clarity, and consistency. Protecting something valuable, like the waterways, demanded foresight and responsibility. By focusing on these principles, Daniel had transformed a potentially contentious situation into one of education, stewardship, and respect. Neighbors continued to approach him with questions and ideas, and Daniel remained approachable and patient. He had become a respected figure, not because he had fought for dominance, but because he had acted thoughtfully and responsibly. His story became an example of how knowledge and preparation could overcome intimidation and misunderstanding, inspiring others to learn about their rights and the importance of preserving shared resources. Throughout all of this, Daniel maintained his daily routines. He walked along the water each morning, watched the sun rise over the lake, and listened to the soft lapping of the waves. These simple moments reminded him why he had fought so hard to understand and protect the waterways. They were more than property. They were history, life, and a connection to the past and future. Daniel also began compiling a small archive of photographs, stories, and documents about the waterways. He wanted future generations to understand their significance and the care required to maintain them. This project became a labor of love, blending history, education, and stewardship. It reinforced the sense of continuity, linking his efforts to those of his ancestors and providing a roadmap for the future. One day, a group of young residents approached Daniel with questions about the wildlife along the shore. He spent the afternoon showing them the areas where birds nested, fish thrived, and plants grew naturally. He explained the importance of respecting the environment and following simple guidelines to protect it. The children listened intently, asking questions, and Daniel felt a deep satisfaction in passing on knowledge that could inspire long-term stewardship. The HOA, now largely sidelined in matters concerning the waterways, occasionally attempted minor administrative actions, but Daniel remained calm and firm. Each attempt was addressed with evidence and clarity, reinforcing the limits of their authority. Over time, their presence became more ceremonial than functional in this aspect, and Daniel's careful management ensured that the waterways were respected and protected. As the months passed, Daniel reflected on the transformation of both the environment and the community. The waterways were healthier, residents were more informed, and the sense of tension had diminished. He had achieved a balance between authority and collaboration, protecting the land while fostering a sense of shared responsibility. It was a result of careful planning, respectful communication, and consistent action. On a particularly quiet evening, Daniel stood on his dock, watching the sun sink into the horizon. The water was calm, reflecting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. He felt a profound sense of satisfaction and peace. The challenges with the HOA had tested his patience and resolve, but they had also led to growth, understanding, and the establishment of a lasting legacy. Daniel knew that vigilance would always be necessary, that challenges could arise, but he felt prepared. He had the knowledge, the records, and the approach to handle any situation responsibly. More importantly, he had the trust of the community and a clear vision for the future. The waterways, once a source of conflict and stress, had become a symbol of resilience, responsibility, and thoughtful leadership. As night fell and the stars reflected in the gentle ripples of the water, Daniel felt a sense of fulfillment. He had defended what was rightfully his, established authority without aggression, and fostered a community that understood the importance of the waterways. The journey had been long and challenging, but the outcome was rewarding and enduring. Daniel had turned a contentious beginning into a story of triumph, respect, and legacy. The waterways were safe, preserved, and appreciated, and he had ensured that they would remain so for generations to come.